Hey everyone, welcome back for part two of the scholarship jacket. So just to kind of recap what we read yesterday, what we learned about, we know that our main character Martha has exemplary academics and is really hoping to get the scholarship jacket. Again, she talked about how her dad couldn't afford to have all of them together with her and her siblings, so she does live with her grandparents, and money is an issue. Especially when it comes to sports. She can't get a sports jacket or even play sports for the school for that matter because of the economic cost of that. So we left off yesterday. We know that two of her teachers, Mr. Schmidt and Mr. Boone, were arguing about who's going to get this scholarship jacket. And then Martha was called into the principal's office and they let her know that there was going to be a cost for the jacket. So, that was weighing really heavy on her heart because she knows that financially that might not be possible for her grandparents. So we're going to pick up where we left off yesterday. So after the principal was talking with her, she says, so by the time I got home, my eyes were red and puffy because she had been crying about it. Where's Grandpa? I asked Grandma, looking down at the floor so she wouldn't ask me why I'd been crying. She was sewing on a quilt and didn't look up. I think he's out back working in the bean field. I went outside and looked out at the fields. There he was. I could see him walking between the rows, his body bent over the little plants, hoe in hand. I walked slowly out to him, trying to think of how I could best ask him for the money. There was a cool breeze blowing and a sweet smell of mesquite in the air, but I didn't appreciate it. I kicked at a dirt clod. I wanted that jacket so much. It was more than just being a valedictorian and giving a little thank you speech for the jacket on graduation night. It represents 8 years of hard work and expectation. I knew I had to be honest with Grandpa. It was my only chance. He saw me and looked up. He waited for me to speak. I cleared my throat nervously and clasped my hands behind my back so he wouldn't see them shaking. Grandpa, I have a big favor to ask you, I said in Spanish, the only language he knew. He still waited silently. I tried again. Grandpa, this year the principal said that the scholarship jacket is not going to be free. It's going to cost $15 and I have to take the money tomorrow. Otherwise, it'll be given to someone else. The last words came out in an eager rush. Grandpa straightened up tiredly and leaned his chin on the hoe handle. He looked out over the field that was filled with the tiny green bean plants. I waited, desperately, hoping he'd say I could have the money. He turned to me and asked quietly, what does a scholarship jacket mean? I answered quickly, maybe there was a chance. It means you've earned it by having the highest grades for 8 years, and that's why they're giving it to you. Too late. I realized the significance of my words. Grandpa knew that I understood it was not a matter of money. It wasn't that. He went back to hoeing the weeds that sprang up between the dedicated little bean plants. It was a time-consuming job. Sometimes the small shoots were right next to each other. Finally, he spoke again. Then if you pay for it, Marta, it's not a scholarship jacket, is it? Tell your principal I will not pay the $15. Which, he does have a good point. So the idea of a scholarship is that it's given to you. It's not something that you necessarily should be paying for. That's the whole point of it. I walked back to the house and locked myself in the bathroom for a long time. I was angry with Grandfather, even though I know he was right. And I was angry with the board, whoever they were. Why did they have to change the rules just when it was my turn to win the jacket? It was a very sad and withdrawn girl who dragged into the principal's office the next day. This time, he did look at me in the eyes. What did your grandfather say? I sat very straight in my chair. He said to tell you he won't pay the $15. The principal muttered something. I couldn't understand under his breath, then walked over to the window. He stood looking out at something outside. He looked bigger than usual when he stood up. He was a tall gaunt man with gray hair, and I watched the back of his head while I waited for him to speak. "Why," he finally said, "your grandfather has the money. Doesn't he own a small bean farm?" I looked at him, forcing my eyes to stay dry. He said if I had to pay for it, then it wouldn't be a scholarship jacket. I said and stood up to leave. I guess you'll just have to give it to Joanne. I hadn't meant to say that. It had just slipped out. I was almost to the door when he stopped me. "Martha, wait." I turned and looked at him, waiting. What did he want now? I could feel my heart pounding. Something bitter and vile tasting was coming up my mouth. I was afraid I was going to be sick. I didn't need the sympathy speeches. He sighed loudly at me, biting at his lip, as if thinking. "Okay, darn it. We'll make an exception in your case. I'll tell the board you'll get your jacket." So even though, Martha's parents didn't have the money, that's why she had to go with her grandparents. Even still, even if her grandfather owns a farm, the idea of having to pay for the jacket, it doesn't really go into detail about whether they actually have the money or not, but it's the principle of it, right? It's the idea that the scholarship jacket is something that should be given. And luckily the principal has decided, you've earned it. I'm going to go talk to the board about it. I could hardly believe it. I spoke in a trembling rush. "Oh, thank you, sir." Suddenly I felt great. I didn't know about adrenaline in those days, but I knew something was pumping through me, making me feel as tall as the sky. What is that an example of? Simile, right? I wanted to yell, jump, run the mile, do something. I ran out so I could cry in the hall where there was no one to see me. At the end of the day, Mr. Schmidt winked at me and said, "I hear you're getting a scholarship jacket this year." His face looked so happy and innocent as a baby's, but I knew better. Without answering, I gave him a quick hug and ran to the bus. I cried on the walk home again, but this time because I was so happy. I couldn't wait to tell Grandpa and ran straight to the field. I joined him in row where he was working, and without saying anything, I crouched down and started pulling up the weeds with my hands. Grandpa worked alongside me for a few minutes, but he didn't ask what happened. After I had a little pile of weeds between the rows, I stood up and faced him. "The principal said he's making an exception for me, Grandpa, and I'm getting the jacket after all. That's after I told him what you said." Grandpa didn't say anything. He just gave me a pat on the shoulder and a smile. He pulled out the crumpled red handkerchief that he always carried in his back pocket and wiped the sweat off his forehead. "Better go see if your grandmother needs any help with supper." I gave him a big grin. He didn't fool me. I skipped and ran back to the house, whistling some silly tune. All right, so we know that that this did have a happy ending for our main character.